Hey everyone, welcome back to the Energy Blueprint podcast. I'm your host, Ari Whitten, and today I have with me Brigit Danner, who is a licensed acupuncturist since 2004 and certified functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner since 2015. After losing everything to toxic mold, Brigit now educates about toxins and coaches women on how to detoxify through a functional approach. She's the host of the upcoming Do It Yourself Detox Summit, a free online summit happening June 3rd through 10th, 2019. Also, we'll have a link to that to sign up and get access free to that summit, which you can get at theenergyblueprint.com/detox summit, all one word, detox summit. So welcome to the show, Brigit. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Ari, and thanks for being on the summit as well. You are one of our speakers that I hunted down for a very long time to get you to come on.
Yeah, thank you for being persistent with hunting me down during a very busy time of the year, and I'm glad that you did, and I'm honored to be a speaker, and also very much a pleasure to have you on my podcast now.
Thanks. Yeah, we're going to be covering an interesting topic.
Yes, mold. So first of all, let's just start off with your bio here, which says, after losing everything to toxic mold. So I think that's probably a wonderful entry point into this whole discussion. Tell us about your personal experience with mold and why you lost everything as a result of it.
Yes, I was living in a home with mold for 9 or 10 years and, kind of didn't realize till the end. So I was, in that time getting more and more into health, like, changing my diet, learning about functional medicine and all that kind of stuff. So it just makes me just go back in time and wonder like how long the mold was affecting me. But when I finally found out, I had strep throat, I had to take antibiotics for the first time in 20 years. And after that, I just wasn't recovering. I was so tired. So I started getting some IV therapy. It didn't do anything. And, I was still eating well and trying to do the right things. And so I said, you got to help me figure out what this is. I'm so tired all the time. And my immune system was just off. And they asked me about my home, which was really a smart question for any practitioner. I said, what has changed in your environment? And one thing was it had rained a lot. And I was like, well, we have this kind of damp basement and it got some super minor flooding. And they said, well, what about mold? So we did check. I didn't really want to be honest. I was like, I know where this could be going.
Yeah.
But my husband was like, yeah, I wanted to check. And so we had a home inspector come out. It's one way to kind of check things. He checked the whole structural integrity of the house and places that moisture could be entering. And he took some samples of drywall and the air. And we did have some species of mold that create mycotoxins. These let off these toxins. So that was just sort of the beginning. When you get an inspector like that, they're not a health practitioner. So that's just, they hand you the report and that's kind of your job to go to a contractor who I want to also point out doesn't really know about health. So as you go to start thinking about some of these structural changes and repairs, they don't always understand enough to have your health in mind. So there's definitely, I run a Facebook group for mold and people are like, well, can I just, rip up my bathroom and then I'm done? And it's not really that simple because you can release a lot more toxins when you fix up your house. And then you've become a host of mold yourself from being in a moldy environment. So there's a lot to fixing it. We made a lot of mistakes. This is partly how we lost everything. We took everything from the basement, put it in our main home. So then we had toxic stuff all over our home. Yeah, we literally lost all our belongings.
So lost everything is not a metaphorical thing. You mean you had pretty much all of your belongings covered in mold spores and you had to get rid of them.
Yeah. Computers, furniture, clothes, just everything we own. Every area of our house had some mold damage. So it wasn't an easy process. We ended up had to move into my parents' home, renovate our home. It was just a very nomadic. We also lost both our cars. They both had mold toxins in them. Wow. So it was just it was a pretty traumatic time. It's like going through a flood or going through, a hurricane or something where you really have to start over. Yeah. And then slowly you have to recover your health again. Cause I got sicker from remediating our house wrong. And I started having muscle twitches and really horrible short-term memory. So yeah, it's becoming a more and more common, I guess you could say. Like, I feel like there's a lot of mold awareness coming up and more people are realizing they've been affected.
Mm-hmm. So there's a lot in what you just said. I want to actually zoom out and go more basic for a moment, just for people who are totally unfamiliar with the whole concept that mold in the house could be something that impacts health. So kind of just go back to the basics here for a minute and just explain the fact that, mold grows in our house and how it might affect our health.
Yeah. So with modern construction, with drywall and with trying to be energy efficient, with having indoor plumbing, there's just a chance for like water to enter the home and come in contact with drywall. It's kind of made of paper fibers and wood and in your walls. That's food for mold. It's kind of normal, right? For mold to grow on a wet wooden surface. In nature, there's a balance between mold and other organisms. So things grow in a balance, they're all competing. In your home, this artificial environment, there isn't much competition. So there's lots of kinds of mold. Not all of them make you sick, but the ones that can make you sick seem to do really well in your home and grow. So not every time you see mold in your home, you can necessarily assume you're going to be sick, but it is possible. And then I think there's this compounded thing going on now with like Wi-Fi in our homes and all this radiation that kind of like can help really grow things like pathogens and weaken our own bodies. And I think that's part of the reason that this is like becoming more and more common. So yeah, your house can get wet and release these mold toxins. And then whatever else is going on in your health, what are you burning your own liver with? There's also genetic factors. So 1 out of 4 people can't tag mycotoxins and make like antigens or antibodies for them. So those people are going to be the ones that get sick. So in a household of, 4 people, you might get 1 sick or 2 sick or 4 sick. It kind of depends on their genetics and also just like their health. Like my son, I don't know his genetics, but he didn't get sick, thank God. Like his dad and I did. So that's kind of a basic overview. And then why I said we had to get rid of our stuff is the mold itself. And then people can again get tricked to think if they remove the mold, they're good. But it releases these, I don't know, kind of like gases. I kind of think of that like Peanuts character, Pigpen, who has like the cloud of dirt around him, and they're releasing like this stuff that lands on things like paper and cloth, and you really can't get it out. Not that, with like a lot of effort, maybe you can, but if you've really been affected by your own stuff, you often have to get rid of it. That's kind of that's the bad news of a lot of this, but it also becomes like the essential step you have to take. You can't say, oh, but I really want to keep my books and my this and my that. Like, why you can't keep that if it's going to make you sick again.
Yeah. So how common of an issue is this? Like, is this something that you think, there's mold growing in, 90% of people's homes and people just are unaware of it? Or is this something that, maybe is affecting 1 to 2% of people? And in those specific rare cases where somebody does have mold in their home, it's a huge health issue, but is generally a rare issue. What's the sort of like, how would you break that down to give people a sense of, whether this might be an issue for them?
Yeah, so some statistics are like 1 in 4 buildings are water damaged. And again, like 1 in 4 people have genetics that don't let them clear mold. But I really think like the percentage of people who are affected, I don't think we totally know that number yet. I think it's kind of like autism, like this growing number that people didn't really see coming. So I'm not sure. I remember before I got sick, Dave Asprey's Moldy movie came out, and he was one of the early like advocates on this issue. And I remember it coming out, and I'm like busy like everybody, and I was like, oh, that'll never apply to me or anyone I know. I'm in no rush to watch this movie. It's like easy to think it won't be you, but I think it's starting to come out that more and more people, especially who are chronically ill, are dealing with toxic mold.
Yeah. So is this an issue that is more prevalent in certain areas of the world or certain climates? Like, for example, does, living in Portland where there's lots of rainy weather lead to a higher likelihood of your house being moldy, or is there any kind of relationship like that?
Yeah, generally, if you're in a place where humidity is higher and more rain, there's more likelihood. So we moved to Arizona, a lot less likelihood.
The driest,
However,
hottest, least
yes,
rainy place you can
burn it
possibly
off,
visit.
burn it all off. We feel really good about our house. So we actually didn't even really have it tested before we came in. It's a quick process, when you buy a home. But I've been in a couple homes in old part of Phoenix, old construction with like cinder block, and I've been affected by mold in those. So
Mm.
it's not impossible in a dry environment. I know there are people, here who have been affected, but yeah, I think more in certain climates. So Florida is another big one. But I hear about people all over. People in Manhattan and their apartment, has a water leak. So I do hear about it all over.
Mm. Now, there's mold, in natural environments. There's mold in, for example, a forest, right? Like,
Right.
why is it that humans have to be concerned with mold when you're living in a home, but you don't necessarily have to be concerned with it, or you're not affected by it by sort of, let's say, camping in the forest in Washington where there might be, mold growing around you?
Yeah, again, like we're just not living in natural environments. We're living in such an artificial environment. So there isn't like if you get moisture in your wall and mold starts to colonize and grow, there isn't anything to combat that naturally. Whereas in a forest, I don't know, there's all sorts of decays and molds and new things growing up and bacteria. And that's just not the environment of your home. And our homes are like kind of meant to be pretty sterile and airtight. A lot of times, homes don't breathe either, like new homes. So some of the homes that are affected aren't just old homes like mine in Portland, but they're new construction where things are just sealed up too tight. So moisture becomes a problem and the humidity level is too high. So yeah, it's just basically like modern construction.
Gotcha. Now, what kind of symptoms would people deal with if they're being exposed to mold? And I know obviously this is the Energy Blueprint podcast, and we talk a lot about fatigue and energy enhancement here. And I know that fatigue is obviously one very common symptom that can arise through a broad range of exposure to toxins, from heavy metals to other to arsenic to all kinds of different gases in the air, and also to mold. But are there any sort of specific symptoms or a constellation of symptoms that indicate mold exposure specifically might be an issue?
Kind of yes and no. I mean, there is a lot of overlap. So one thing I would say, again, if you kind of feel like you've tried everything, you're doing all the right things, and you're still so tired, I'll go over the other symptoms. But if you still have some things like you just are like, why is this happening? I think there's often a toxicity issue. It could be mold, it could be Lyme disease, it could be heavy metals, like you mentioned. But yeah, I was excited. I was most excited to come on and talk about the fatigue. So the mold toxins can actually enter the cell and affect the mitochondria and ATP production. And when I was at my sickest, I was so bone tired that like I started to not want to wake up in the morning. I was just so tired. It was just like a deep core, like fatigue. And I feel like I could be lots of things, I guess, thyroid in this, but like I feel like when you have that just deep like kind of fatigue, I feel like that's energy production. You could probably speak to that a lot more than I could. But that's one symptom. Muscle weakness or wasting, muscle twitches. I mean, some people become like paralyzed, they can't walk even. I had like a twitching eyelid, definitely mental cognition, like short-term memory, recall, and that kind of a thing. And then can go just on to affect so many other systems. Like it's going to dysregulate your gut, like guaranteed. It's going to be colonizing in there, and it makes chronic inflammation. So kind of the illness is often called chronic inflammatory response syndrome. So what it's actually doing is just firing all these immune like inflammatory responses all over your body. So could be headaches. It's definitely going to dysregulate your hormones. So if you have like low hormone levels, thinking back, like some of my early symptoms before I even knew I had mold, I found out I had Epstein-Barr, and my period would come 2 weeks too early. And You know, like I had chronic back pain that like nobody was able to fix for me. And that was probably just the chronic inflammation. There could be little funny things too, like your eyes being red or your nose being stuffy all the time. Skin rashes could be coming up. So yeah, unfortunately there is a pretty broad spectrum that can come with it. But I would say, you know, fatigue and brain fog probably at the top, and then like some immune weakness, you know, muscular pain or weakness, those kind of things being towards the top.
Gotcha. And you mentioned chronic inflammatory response syndrome. Can we talk a little bit more about that? And in particular, are there any symptoms of that chronic inflammatory response syndrome that, you know, that are sort of unique to that? You know, and one example that I think of is um, a sort of a paradoxical response to many phytochemicals that might temporarily induce like a pro-oxidant response in the
Yes.
body, and a pro-oxidant action, and then, you know, kind of ultimately confer all these benefits. From my experience, some people with chronic inflammatory response syndrome or mold exposure in their house, they just become intolerant of a wide array of supplements that are otherwise beneficial for most people, phytochemicals and things like alpha lipoic acid and things like that. Have you seen any of that kind of thing?
Yeah, I'm actually just reading this. I'll just share it because it's right here. I'm reading this really great book.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I have it as
Yeah,
well.
so great. And yeah, he talks a lot about the chemical sensitivities and sensitivities to treatment that can come up. I feel like reading this, I've been lucky. Like I'm not that sensitive to all sorts of treatments. But when your immune system is like so like on alert and the toxic load is so high in the body, it's kind of like any input could fire it. And, you know, he gives an example in there as like someone like passing out just to smell like laundry detergent, you know, like that's just like a quick airborne response. But yeah, people can be very responsive to supplements in a negative way. And I've had some clients like that. And to be frank, until like I was reading this, I didn't like totally understand the mechanism. It's not easy as a practitioner when you can barely give people anything. You
Yeah.
know, it's a hard spot to be in. And sometimes it's just keeping the dose super, super low. So yeah, whether it's like because you're releasing more toxins or just the immune system's reacting. But what I like from the book is like, he's not like saying just don't do anything. He's just saying like go a lot slower. And then there's things we talk about in the summit that you're on about like doing the sauna or doing dry brushing. And just some people, that's mild enough that they won't have any effect. But some people can barely use a sauna or, you know, just depending on, yeah, how sensitive they are because of all this.
Yeah. Yeah. From what I understand, I think the NRF2 pathway is really critical in all of this. Like this pathway that responds to various kinds of hormetic stressors and toxin exposures, everything from exercise to, you know, exposures to benzene and, you know, air pollutants and sauna exposure, red light exposure, phytochemical exposure. Everything is acting upon this NRF2 pathway, which is triggered by a temporary increase in reactive oxygen species inside the cell. And then it triggers this, you know, response from, you know, this NRF2 pathway gets triggered, which activates the antioxidant response element inside of the cells, which upregulates all these, you know, internal antioxidants, glutathione, catalase, superoxide dismutase, all these things involved in defending against oxidants and also upregulating detoxification. But within people with chronic inflammatory response syndrome, I think the thinking is sort of like that whole system is almost like non-active because it's being chronically overwhelmed by the mold.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And there's some, you know, there's some blood tests you can run for certain inflammatory markers. But yeah, when especially with mold, like I guess other infections you can get, like you are constantly exposed if you're in the house, and then it's often like colonized in your body. So then you're getting like exposure like right from within you. So yeah, I'd like to learn more about that pathway as well and why exactly it happens. I feel like in a sense, I'm just sort of coming out of the fog of all of it and being more willing to like study it in an intellectual way now. Before I was like, ugh, just leave me alone so I can get better. But now I'm like, that's
You're like, I don't care about the mechanisms, but all I know is this is ruining my life.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's good. Good news is like you can be on the other side. My health isn't perfect, but I'm certainly like a lot better than I was, and able to understand this in a different way. And I'm like really thankful for people who are publishing about this, because there frankly still isn't a lot. But the resources are coming to kind of meet this wave of new illness that's coming up.
Yeah. So you've mentioned a couple times in passing that mold can colonize our bodies. So if we have mold in our house, what is it actually releasing? So is it releasing toxins into the air, or is it releasing spores that colonize things and grow?
Both.
What's actually going on there?
Yeah, definitely both. And usually the more dangerous to you is the mycotoxins, but the spores produce the mycotoxins. So, mostly what your body is dealing with is the mycotoxins coming off of the spores and your furniture once it's gotten. But the spores you can actually inhale and swallow, and they can colonize your nose and your gut and maybe even other areas. They're thinking like your lung and your jaw, like it's kind of crazy to think about it. So yeah, there is that element as well. So I always encourage people to do nasal testing and treatment for the colonization in the nose. And then the gut, there's lots of different potential approaches for the gut. You can see kind of from like some gut testing and organic acids testing about colonization. You can see candida too, which is usually going to be co-infecting when you have mold. So I think that's a good area to check for if you can afford to do that kind of round of testing for the gut. I guess my approach with the gut is more like treating all of it, treating infections, doing binders that just move things out of the gut. You could probably do some like biofilm disruptors too, and essential oils like topically. So I guess I don't have like a clear protocol on getting it out of the gut. I just I'm doing lots of different things.
Gotcha. So I guess there's a couple layers to this. One is, how do we check for mold in our home? And I know there's lots of nuances to that. And then the next layer is, how do we check for mold in our bodies, which you just talked about a little bit there. But let's talk about, like, if somebody suspects that they have some of these sorts of symptoms, and maybe they have a sort of, a hunch that maybe there's mold in their house, or maybe they've seen some mold but never thought anything of it and had no idea that it could impact their health. How would people take, next steps to discern if they're actually, or determine if there actually is mold in their house that's of concern?
Yeah, so I'll mention a few ways in the home. We started with a mold inspector that I mentioned. We own that home, and I think it was a really good place for us to start, because we understood like these structural problems with our home and like areas to look, and then we kind of got an inkling about the toxic mold in our home. So I think that was a great place to start. We later did a dust test where you collect dust around your home, and it's a mycotoxin dust test. So then it's actually giving you a sense of like the levels of what is actually making you sick. Whereas the first mold inspector test was more like spore populations and stuff. There are some plate tests, which back when I was doing this, I heard weren't that good, but I think that's coming along. Like, there's a company called Immulytics or something like that, that's making plates that you can send back into them, and they'll have a consultation with you. And I think it's more affordable. So especially if you're in an apartment or at your workplace, you might want to start with like that lower cost option, and maybe not quite as like, I don't know, as fancy of a test or whatever, but I think that's an option to do that's affordable. Trying to think if there's anything else in the home. I think those are mostly the ways to test in the home. And then in the body, I mentioned there's like a nasal test or some gut testing. Won't exactly tell you like.
You know what, Brigit, just 1 second before we get there.
Yeah.
On the home, is there any indication other than those tests that might alert somebody to the presence of mold in their house? Like, I know obviously like a musky sort of smell in the house. You know, so if you go
Yeah.
into a really moldy place, like you can sort of smell it and detect it instantly. But is that always the case that that's true, or is it possible to have mold in your home without any like smell or sight of the mold at all?
Well, there can be mold in your walls, so then you won't get a visual and you probably won't get much of a smell. But like for us, we had that, which we didn't know, but we did have like the wet basement that we did know about. But it still wasn't very visible until we got the inspector and he was like, hey, look down here at your like little where the board meets the floor. We're like, oh, like it wasn't super obvious. It did have a smell, but there's various things going on in that basement. So I'm not sure, like, our sewage was like a little off, like who knows.
Yeah.
So I don't think you can always smell it, but you can often like see it like growth in the bathroom. And, many people have had like an incident, where their bathtub flooded or like it was super rainy and their roof leaked. I used to be the kind of homeowner who was just like all about decorating and like didn't care about any of those other things. You need to care about those things. You need to, like, we had some gutters that weren't draining right, so it was putting water by our foundation instead of further out. So that's something that like our mold inspector checked for, like moisture in the walls. You can get like a moisture reader. You can get a humidity reader. Your moisture should be, gosh, I can't remember now what it should be, but like 40% or something. Like our moisture in our basement was way too high. Like we should have run a dehumidifier there the entire time. So I think, yeah, some clues are like smell, seeing visible mold, knowing there was wetness or still is. What else was I just thinking about? I forget. Getting a moisture read. Oh, humidity levels, overpacked closets and stuff where you like, sometimes you get stuff out of a closet and it's like damp or it could smell. That's not a good thing. So you do want circulation in your house. If you feel like things just like don't circulate, those could be some clues as well. Or like moisture on the windows. Somebody from Japan mentioned like, oh, under my futon is all wet. Yeah, that's, a good environment for mold to grow. So just think about, am I creating an environment for mold to grow? Have I had leaks? That kind of a thing.
Yeah. Okay. One more
Great
question
Yeah.
here on this subject. So let's say that you have a hunch that, you have symptoms that align with mold in your house. You suspect that, maybe by the smell or the look, or you've seen some mold in your house, or the humidity levels are high and you know that you have an environment conducive to it, or there was an incident of water damage in your house. You're starting to put some of these pieces together, that
Maybe.
you're talking about. And maybe people are listening and considering, well, maybe mold exposure in my house, mold in my house is a cause of these symptoms. And then let's say they do the testing, whether it's from the plates or a home inspector or some of these other methods that you're talking about. And they determine that mold is in fact growing in their house. What is the path to recovering one's health look like from that point? Now, does it always have to result in moving to a different place, or like massive remediation of in your house, or kind of what are some of the different scenarios as far as how that would play out?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I get this one a lot too. So I think there could be some scenarios where you're not really sick. Like say your bathroom has had some water damage, but you're not really sick and like you think it could be handled, then that can maybe be handled. But if you're really sick and, there's a situation that's been going on a long time in your home, I don't know. I get this question a lot and it's a difficult one because I know for us, we're like, well, we want to just do this and then move back in, just do this and move back, just fix this and that. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work. And I've had some clients like that too. I had a client in this lovely London home made of stone and she had all her business there. And, you also become paralyzed by your own sickness and inertia and like, you don't want to do all these things.
Yeah.
But, and I kept trying to tell her, like, you just need to do this. You just need to move. There are some tests called like the ERMI test that I've never really run that will kind of rate it and be like, you should definitely get out type of a thing. I don't know. I don't know if it's that cut and dry. I mean, if you're very sick and there's a big problem in your house, it's going to require a lot of stirring the pot. At the minimum, you need to move your stuff out into storage. I think while that happens, move your family out, have it all super cleaned up by the time you come back, like someone scrubbing down the walls with, vinegar and essential oils. There's now like essential oil bombs you can do for mold. So, really, actually, someone who works for me went through this recently. They really cleaned the house out. They got rid of everything made of cloth. And tried to come back in, and she's mostly doing well except like the laundry area of the house, so it's still like a little iffy, but they really gutted it. Bed's gone, all the things gone. So I guess, I hope that there are people who only have to just remodel their bathroom for $3,000 and let it be done. I can just say in my instance, that wasn't true. So maybe it depends the extent of the damage and the extent of your poor health. Sometimes it's not even a thing you're in anymore. Sometimes it's exposure you had 10 years ago and it's just colonized in your body. Sometimes it's your workplace. And then, there's the question of getting out, or what will they do for you? There's apartments too. There's not much rights that you have as a person with mold illness in an apartment or workplace. Like there's just a lack of understanding. There's a lack of appreciation. And it's frustrating, but ultimately I think you just need to move. Like at least you just have an apartment and you can move. Again, that can be a hard decision to make. But if you go online, like there's thousands and thousands of people like us in this situation that have made. I had one poor lady I met, she was remodeling her house, living with her mom, and then the house burned down while she was remodeling. I mean, it's like the stuff that happens is just horrible.
Wow.
So, I hope that there are people who are able to fix it a lot quicker. I think it just depends on the setting. So that's a little bit about the home. You definitely have to fix the environment. You can't keep being re-exposed.
Yeah.
That's key.
There's one more layer to this that I think is also potentially troublesome for many people. And that is that I would imagine that once you start to realize you do have mold in your home, and that mold kind of spreads and covers all the things in the environment, and you then have to have discussions of whether you're going to get rid of, you're going to throw away all your stuff, or you're going to try and clean it, or something to that effect. I know that if I was in that situation and I was trying to salvage anything, I would be sort of second guessing myself, of like kind of living in fear, I guess, or anxiety all the time of like, does this stuff still have mold on it? And am I still being exposed to this? You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's better at the minimum, if you want to salvage stuff, to put it away in storage and then re-expose yourself. And I think you're sadly going to find out that stuff is not salvageable. But at least that's what we did with some of our stuff. We put some of our stuff in a couple units and went back to it immediately. Was like, nope, this is not happening. But we weren't ready to make that decision at the time. Like that's a huge decision to make. I just interviewed with Evan Brand, and he's probably a friend of yours, who just went through this. And he said for him, it was pretty easy. It was pretty cathartic to just go, get rid of it all. And you don't have to, burn it. Other people can enjoy it, just not you. You're done with it. So, it's not like it's going to
let me ask you that. So on that point, I mean, is it ethical to even sell the stuff that is infested with mold? I mean, now you're just spreading it and somebody else is going to have it in their house. I mean, wouldn't it be more responsible to burn it if you are certain that it is covered in mold or mold spores or mold toxins?
I just don't think everyone will be affected by it the same way. Like, consider I was in a house with that stuff for 10 years. So it's become very sensitized to it. But if you move like one armchair into one home that doesn't have mold, I don't think it's going to get everyone sick. I just, I've got that question too about clothes from Goodwill and stuff like personally, I've bought a lot of clothes. I didn't have any clothes. I bought a lot of clothes from Goodwill, and with a good washing, they were fine. Could have some of them had mold? Yeah, maybe, but it wasn't my mold. It was like, I think it's just when it's concentrated in your own stuff. So yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we certainly didn't try to sell everything, but when you've like lost everything, you want to like, let me see if I can sell my couch or whatever, at least we made a little bit. Frankly, it wasn't that much money, but I don't think everyone's going to be affected by like one item. Even my parents have a few tiny items of ours that are in their home now. And I don't notice that when I go over. But if they had taken all our furniture, we definitely would have like gotten sick when we went over there, but I don't know if they would have ever gotten sick.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's a good question. And again, like it's such a confusing thing. Like I remember when we like traded in a car, I think they just probably scrapped my old car anyway, but I started saying something about mold and my husband's like, shut up. But people just don't understand it. Like if you say, well, this, like we had mold in the home, but this couch doesn't have mold. Like they're like, what are you even talking about? Like,
Right.
so it's just sort of like, there's some things we definitely got rid of. We had a giant dumpster in front of our house and we threw out tons of stuff. But there's some things that we felt like had some value and that were nice pieces that we wanted to try to sell. And I don't feel too bad about it.
Good. So let's talk about mold in the body now. I know you covered this in passing, but it can colonize the sinuses, it can colonize the gut, maybe the lungs, and potentially some other areas. What are some of the more common areas of colonization and the symptoms that might be associated with that could kind of clue somebody into maybe they have been colonized by mold?
Yeah, and even if you aren't colonized per se, like maybe you had a short exposure, you can still have the toxins bumping around. As we talked about, they can go into the cell. So then that's, becomes kind of everywhere that the toxins could be, and they create like poor circulation and that inflammation we talked about. So were you asking how they know first, or how do we go about removing it?
What are some of the symptoms that someone might encounter, like
Okay. So
like let's say a sinus colonization or a gut colonization?
Okay, so sinus, like I have a sinus colonization, yet I have pretty much clear sinuses. But I do have some postnasal drip, and I had some you know, like now I'm really having a lot of asthma. I think I'm pretty allergen sensitive, but this is sort of a newer phase I'm in. So you could have some clear respiratory symptoms, or they could be pretty subtle, like a little bit of, thickening of the throat, or glands a little swollen. Or you could have full on, chronic sinusitis, which many people have. And I don't think many people are talking about mold for that. So that's a pretty easy swab test that you can run. So that's good news.
And is it a specific kind of mold that you test for? Is it, aspergillus, or is it some other type of mold?
So the test is mostly there to focus on this like Marcon's infection you can get in your nose, this like antibiotic resistant staph infection in your nose. That's kind of like the primary goal of the test, because when your immune system is disrupted, you can have this staph infection overgrow. But they will tell you some little bit about colonization. And I don't know how many strains or whatever they test. I mean, we could pull up my test results to see. But they will tell you a little bit about colonization and like biofilm thickness. So those are kind of like the secondary parts of the test.
So you're saying Marcon's, and Marcon's is a bacteria, not a
Yes.
mold, but you're saying that often co-occurs with mold infection or mold
Yes.
colonization?
Yeah. So because the mold has caused such immune disruption, that lets the staph infection grow. And that's not the only thing that could let the staph infection grow up. It could be other immune disruptors. So that nasal test primarily tests for that staph infection, which then like disrupts your melatonin production, which is a big deal. And a lot of people with mold illness like don't sleep well, and then become like more prone to various diseases like cancers and heart disease and stuff. So yeah, I don't know how many strains it tests in your nose. I'd have to check that one.
Gotcha.
And then for the gut, again, it isn't like super direct. It's like letting you know about co-infections, or the Great Plains Lab oat test, organic acids test, I guess, will let you know about colonization in the gut. And I don't entirely know which markers they're referring to. My coach that I work with was saying, I think it's just showing if there's a lot of candida. But I think there's some other markers too that will let you know about colonization. But it's not like super direct, right? It's kind of indirect.
Gotcha.
Oh, but then I don't know if we talked yet about, so those are colonization. There's also just mycotoxin testing, which you can do through blood or urine. I think urine is just easier, where you do ideally a little challenge with glutathione or sauna. to try to kind of stir up some of these mycotoxins and then hopefully pee them out and then see those levels. So that's testing just really came out, I think, in the last 3 to 5 years. So that's a great, really direct way to test. And I like that way a lot. So, and then prices coming down to like $300 or so to run those kinds of tests.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So we talked about remediation in the home environment. What if somebody has mycotoxins in their body? They've got maybe even some mold spores in their body. What does the path to self-remediation look like?
Yeah. So I'll just start at the top. So for the nose, you can do like a silver spray in the nose. You can do potentially like some essential oil kind of herbal blends like biocidin, or a few companies have them. You can also do pharmaceuticals if you're working with a doctor. They call it bag spray, like an antibiotic spray. And sometimes you have to do antibiotics internally too. Then also up at the top, you can think about brain health. I mean, that's a little bit more symptomatic, but it also could be helping like this integrity of the brain. So I like phosphatidylcholine. I like magnesium. I like some like good fatty acids. That definitely helped like when I was going through headaches and stuff like that. I have used a nebulizer for my lungs because I did kind of have some lung symptoms. I would just put like silver in with water and then it just like steams into your mouth. I found essential oils to be a little harsh to use that way. So I mostly stuck to the silver, but there's probably some other like herbals you could potentially use to nebulize your lungs. Yeah, as we talk about in the summit, I did my favorite things of all for treating mold were sauna, coffee enema. Those are probably the top two. And then I would do like just simple stuff like dry brushing, green drinks, like chlorophyll. I think you need to get like more oxygen to your cells. That becomes like, you probably know more about that than I do. It becomes a big issue. So getting those greens, it seemed really helpful. And then binders are like a big part of the mold detox world. So if you don't tag mold well, as you try to detox it, it generally tends to just recirculate. So you need the binders to carry it out. And there's really a growing collection of supplements now for that. There's like the fulvic and humic acid, there's charcoal, there's pectin, there's like zeolite. There's probably like 10 different substances now that you can use as binders, and it might be good to rotate those or just, see what your body likes. To me, I never really felt much from binders. Some people do. Some people, it like stirs the pot a little bit for them. But they're just like the garbage men. Like I don't feel like you feel them, but they're doing their job slowly, like just moving stuff out.
Are there any binders, like that are particularly effective for mold toxins? So like, is charcoal more effective than clay or fulvic acid or pectin or something like that?
I think it depends who you ask. Charcoal generally stays in the gut. Yeah, right.
The answer, it's not a matter of the substances themselves. It's just a matter of which person you ask about the substances.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think people have different preferences clinically, right?
Yeah.
But I think charcoal stays in your gut, whereas some substances can potentially go to like the bloodstream. And then there's like fulvic and humic acid. I think I think those are pretty good for molds. What else? I mean, yeah, I think there really is a range of different things that like people, is glucomannan also pectin? Can't remember.
It's not pectin itself. It's a different kind of
Oh.
fiber. It's a fiber from cognac root.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, we've had all these suggested to us over the course of our mold journeys. That's why I feel like, well, different people I think have different favorites. But I think the fulvic and humic acid is really good. I just use I've used a clay straight that I liked from Oregon. Now I use a couple things that are like blends that have clay, charcoal, fulvic and humic acid. Jay Davidson, who's on the summit, has a biotoxin binder that has kind of special like chain size of fulvic and humic acid. So this is why I think it starts to be a hard answer, because some people are like, oh, well, ours is better because it's like micro sized and ours is whatever liposomal. And it is a very evolving market. Like there are new things coming out all the time. And I do think some of them are better than even a couple of years ago.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So sort of wrapping up big picture, if you could reduce your knowledge around detoxification more broadly or mold specifically down to your top 3 tips, what would you say are your top 3 strategies or sort of 3 pieces of advice that you want to leave people with?
I would say avoid toxins in your home and get familiar, whether those are molds, plastics, water quality, air quality, food quality, cleaning products, beauty products, because that's where you spend the most time. So you really need to, have your environment be as clean as you can. Second, I would say, supporting your detox pathways every day, getting out in the sun, like you talk about, using a sauna, eating greens, eating fermented foods, just like simple things, I think is a great idea. And I'll say third would be like attend our summit to learn more.
Good. I like that piece of advice. So with that in mind, tell us about your upcoming do-it-yourself detox summit.
Yeah, so you're in it, and honestly, the speaker lineup.
That's all you need to
fantastic.
say. That's the whole.
Just drop the mic. Drop the mic. Go see Ari. No, your talk was great. I mean, it's so important. We just have such a great variety. I just think like this. I feel like I was being a total Debbie Downer in this conversation. But the good news is like the more you know, like the more hope there is. And if you feel like there's some symptoms that you don't know why they're happening, or in your children you don't know why they're happening, you do need to become more aware of just this whole world of toxin avoidance and using binders and like just different, it behooves you in this modern world to become more knowledgeable. So we don't intend for you to like memorize everything on the summit. Just, synergistically, like listen to the talks that appeal to you, pick up a few tips, like learn what you need for where you're at. Maybe you're thinking of buying a water filter and you'll learn a good tip. Maybe you're thinking of buying a sauna and you'll learn a good tip. So just keep learning and enjoy that process, because even in this super toxic world, we can reduce our load, and I'm a ton healthier than I have been. So there is definitely hope even for like the hardest cases.
Yeah, 100%. And one thing I want to say, on a kind of a note from my perspective is there are some people out there, some skeptics of sort of the whole world of detoxification, who have attitudes like, oh, we have a liver, we have kidneys, that's all the detox we need. The truth is there was certainly a time in human evolution where that was all the detox we needed, but we are living in an increasingly toxic world where we are all being exposed to things in the air supply, in the water supply, in the food supply, on a level that is just hundreds or actually more, maybe tens of thousands of times higher than we were at any time in evolution up until the last 50 or 100 years or so. And so because of that, and just as one example of this, this is even occurring from before the moment you're born. And they've even done studies with like umbilical cord blood, and they've measured the amount of toxins, and there are literally hundreds of detectable man-made toxins in umbilical cord blood. So we're being exposed to a huge amount of these things from the time we're babies until we're adults. So I think it behooves all of us to have some smart habits built into our lives to support detoxification, to support our body's natural detoxification pathways, and to include things like binders, to just be aware of these sources of toxicity and minimize them from our food supply, our water supply, our air supply, and, of course, mold, as we talked about, and do as much as possible to support our body's ability to keep toxicity low.
Yeah, I think so too. I think the summit will do well, but I think there's still a little bit of like, why do you say that? Like, it's a little bit of lack of, probably not only your awesome listeners, but like people just don't really get it. Like they still don't really get that this is a big deal. If someone's trying to tell you it's not that bad, they're probably selling you something that's toxic. So don't listen to that. Anybody, doesn't matter how educated you are, how expensive a house you live in, whatever, like you can be affected by this stuff as well as your family. So thank you. I really appreciate that message, Ari.
Yeah, thank you for coming on the show, Brigit. And for everybody listening, again, you can get access to her new do-it-yourself detox summit. Just go to theenergyblueprint.com/detox summit, all one word, and you can sign up to get free access right on that link. So thank you again, Brigit. Really a pleasure having you on. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Hey there, this is Ari again. One more quick thing before you go. Just make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Energy Blueprint, and also make sure to subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast platform, whether that's iTunes or Stitcher or anything else. I hope you guys enjoyed this interview, and I will see you again next week.